As of the writing of this review, I have completed the main story of this game twice on PlayStation 5. During my first playthrough, I 100% completed the map, and my second playthrough was a New Game Plus file to earn the Platinum Trophy. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, developed by Insomniac Games, takes place 1 year after the original Marvel Spider-Man. This time, the story focuses on Miles Morales rather than on Peter Parker. The game takes place over Miles' winter break while Peter Parker goes overseas to accompany MJ on a business trip for a few weeks. Throughout the game, Miles discovers what it's like to be New York's only Spider-Man as he struggles to find the balance between wanting to be a normal teenager and having to take on the responsibility of being a superhero. Miles Morales is a smaller package than the original game. Coming in at $50, many people called it a DLC expansion or not a full game. I find these comments to be inaccurate. The game does feature a nearly identical map to the first game, but Harlem is much more fleshed out and it features Roxxon Plaza, snow covers the entire map, and the entirety of Manhattan is decked out in Christmas lights and holiday decorations. But these are the only changes to the map. I can see why this would cause some people to call this game DLC, but I still disagree. This game features a new protagonist with unique moves, animations, spider suits, and a new supporting cast, and a brand new original story. I would compare it to an Uncharted Lost Legacy scenario, but I still think Miles Morales has more content than Lost Legacy does. Miles Morales features 19 different spider suits, one of which is locked to New Game Plus, whereas Spider-Man Remastered features a whopping 41 suits. There may be fewer suits overall, but they are very unique and some even come equipped with their own unique finishing moves. My favorite suits were probably the Bodega Cat suit and the Into the Spider-Verse suit. Suit mods return, and this time there are also visor mods. These can be equipped to any suit and they unlock certain perks or abilities. You can have one suit mod and one visor mod equipped at a time. I liked the variety, but I honestly found myself equipping two I liked and then never changed them throughout my entire playthrough. I don't necessarily consider that a bad thing, but they did not impact combat as much as the suit mods and suit powers did in the original game. The combat system in Miles Morales shines brighter and feels much more expansive than Peter Parker did in the first game. Miles has electricity, venom powers, and invisibility cloaking, which adds much more variety and options to approaching combat. Invisibility can make the stealth missions a bit too easy sometimes, but the timer on the cloaking runs out quickly, so you still have to be careful. The venom powers are my favorite addition to the combat, and they really help set Miles apart from Peter. Throughout the game, you unlock more powers as a result of story missions and by progressing through the skill tree. The Venom powers also showcase the capabilities of the DualSense controller as you feel the sparks of electricity in the controller because of the advanced haptic feedback. And of course, finishing moves return. Miles has a brand new set of aerial, ground, and aerial-to-ground finishing moves. They are filled with style and personality, and when they go into slow-mo as Miles uses a Venom punch, they are incredibly satisfying. Gadgets return as well, but I noticed they seem to be much less important. Because of Miles' cloaking and venom powers, I found myself rarely using gadgets other than the standard web shooters. Miles' gadgets are brand new and weren't featured in the first game, but I would have liked to see a bigger focus on using the gadgets to defeat certain enemies or complete certain missions like in the original game. One gripe I do have is that since Miles has venom powers, many side missions and story missions focused on Miles using his venom to disarm locks, weapons, or add power to generators or drain power from generators. After playing through the game twice, I noticed that Venom was used as a puzzle-solving mechanic in many missions, and it started to feel a tad bit stale. The mechanic of web-slinging is mostly unchanged, apart from Miles' unique animations. In the first Spider-Man game, Peter had been Spider-Man for 8 years, so he pretty much knew what he was doing. His web skills and fighting were very well rehearsed and practiced. In this game, Miles just got his powers not too long ago and is still a young kid in high school, so we get to see Miles' personality and his lack of experience shine through his animations. When web-slinging to a ledge, Miles wobbles a bit as he lands, and during combat, his punches and kicks look very inexperienced. When web-slinging, Miles will swing backwards and do tricks, and Miles just looks like he is having fun being Spider-Man. Sure, web-slinging mostly stayed the same from a mechanics perspective, but Miles' new animations made the same web-slinging system feel fresh. In the new original story featured in Spider-Man Miles Morales, the Underground is a new gang that wants to replace the Kingpin's presence in New York. Their new leader, the Tinkerer, is arming them with highly advanced weapons. The Tinkerer has a grudge against the new tech company named Roxxon. Roxxon built a new plasma in Harlem, and they are developing a new reactor which they claim is a source of clean energy called Nuform. Roxxon's leader, Simon Krieger, claims Nuform is 100% safe, while the Tinkerer claims that Nuform causes people to get sick and die. Miles gets caught in the middle of this conflict between Roxxon and the Underground and has to try his best to defeat both of them. While all of this is happening, Miles does his best to keep an eye on his mother as she runs for city council in Harlem. The main story of this game is much shorter than the original Spider-Man game. If you only focus on story missions, you can finish in around 5 to 6 hours. Peter's game, which was much longer, but it also had more filler. The Octavius Industries puzzle missions and the MJ and Miles stealth missions really threw the pacing of the first game off. In Miles Morales, you play as Miles the entire time, and there's only a handful of missions where you are Miles and not Spider-Man. Miles is the main character, but he is accompanied by an amazing supporting cast. His best friend Genki, his mother Rio, his childhood friend Finn, and the entire neighborhood of Harlem really come alive in this game. Miles' relationship with his uncle Aaron and the Tinkerer is beautifully developed, and they make for some surprising and emotional story events. The story may be shorter in length, but each story mission is filled with impressive action and set pieces and crucial plot developments. Just because the story is shorter does not mean it lacks quality or impact. In my opinion, Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales is best played when you 100% the map. There's a decent amount of side missions in the game, and many are presented in the form of the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app that was developed by Genki. These missions have Miles meet residents of Harlem and help them with their problems or stop crimes that they report. Each neighbor in Harlem is very unique and diverse. Miles rescues a shop owner's cat, helps a deaf girl, helps an EMT find a stolen car, and so much more. Crimes also return from the first game, but they are much less frequent, in a good way. In the first game, I often felt like crimes were popping up too often and would distract me from collecting things or pursuing side quests. In Miles Morales, the crimes have plenty of variety and show up less frequently. You can also pull up the Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man app by swiping left on the touchpad and select a crime, and it will spawn it for you. This feature is very useful when completing trophies related to crimes. The crime variety features prisoners that are still loose in New York as a result of what happened in the first game, and the Underground and Roxxon also have crimes throughout the city. The Underground and Roxxon also have enemy bases like in the first game. Other side missions include the training missions that Peter Parker left for Miles and the music collectibles that Uncle Aaron hid to tell the story of his relationship with Miles' father. The main story may only be a few hours, but completing all of the enemy bases, app requests, and collectible missions, the game took me nearly 20 hours. If you only play the main story, you are missing out on a lot of character development and personality from the people of Harlem. When playing on PlayStation 5, there are no load screens. Fast travel fades the screen black and fades back to gameplay in less than 2 seconds. Traveling to indoor bases or story missions also feature near instant loading or no loading at all. Even cold booting the game from the home menu takes around 12 seconds. When on PS5, you have 3 performance options. At launch, there was a high fidelity option that had more detailed lighting, textures, and ray trace reflections that ran at a native 4K 30 FPS. And there was also a high performance option with not as detailed lighting, textures, and no ray trace reflections that ran at a native 4K 60 FPS. However, in a recent update, Insomniac Games added a ray tracing performance mode that runs at a dynamic 4K with some textures and details toned down, but it features both 60 FPS and ray trace reflections. During my 2 playthroughs, I played using the high fidelity mode. The 30 FPS never dipped once, and the ray tracing off of the buildings of Manhattan was spectacular, especially at night. While recording footage for the video version of this review, I played in the ray tracing performance mode and it looked and ran great. I could tell the reflections weren't quite as detailed, but for buttery smooth 60 frames per second, it was a worthy compromise. All 3 performance mode options look great on a 4K display, and I didn't experience a single drop in the frame rate in any of the modes. The snowfall, decorations, and updated character models on PS5 looked fantastic and were highly detailed. I've heard the PS4 version looks and runs pretty well, but it is clear that the game is best experienced when I'm played on PlayStation 5. During my experience, Miles Morales did feature a few bugs and glitches. During my first playthrough, Miles had a few strings of dialogue that did not have audio. I saw Miles' mouth moving, but I couldn't hear anything he was saying. In my second playthrough, that same cutscene worked just fine. The game also crashed on me one time after I died, and in my second playthrough, the final boss soft locked and I had to restart from a checkpoint. None of these bugs ruined my overall experience, but I felt they were significant enough to point out. Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales may be a smaller package than its predecessor, but that does not mean the game lacks quality. The cast does an excellent job supporting Miles. Harlem shines as they take pride in having their own Spider-Man, and Miles' struggle between wanting to be a teenager and having to protect New York make for a fantastic storytelling experience that is filled with twists and turns and emotional moments. The massive action-packed set pieces and gameplay variety help this game shine, but some of the puzzles relied a bit too heavily on Miles' Venom powers, and the gadgets were largely forgotten. With all of these things considered, I give this game a 9.5 out of 10.